Phase 3 is a substantial addition to the Infinity Saga. It's home to a combination of some amazingly crafted stories and character development. Obviously, it contains some flaws, but it seems people like myself and other Marvel fans find these flaws minute because of how well structured and well executed this phase is. You may have noticed in the title, this is part 1 of 2. Phase 3 was massive, starting with Civil War 2016 all the way to Far From Home 2019. So I just thought I'd split these into 2 videos. I'll let you know now that this video will be like my Phase 1 and 2 reviews, where I'd consolidate all my videos on said phase into one. However, closer to the end I will talk about my feelings on this phase.
Phase 3 is the culmination of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe as started in May of 2008 with the release of Iron Man 1. And it really is an unprecedented culmination of a series of films interlinked together, which at the time had never been done before. And for us, the important thing is making it all come together. We've been planning this for years and years and years.
Kevin Feige announced Phase 3 back in the fall of 2014. This was back before Age of Ultron, and yet it was already set in stone, including the dates for these supposed movies. It just shows how consistent they were and really puts the multiverse saga to shame. They knew where these stories were going half a decade before they were in production. It's amazing, and that's the main reason I adore Phase 3. The way these movies intertwine is on a whole new level, with every post-credit scene satisfyingly ducktailing into the next film. Marvel reportedly earned $13.5 billion from Phase 3 alone, with a budget of $2.5 billion. Those numbers are insane, and makes you realize just how big Marvel were at this point. Let's get into it. Feel free to hop around to any point of the video, there'll be timestamps just below. Now let's jump into Phase 3, Part 1. Civil War is one of Marvel's movies that solidified my love for the MCU. And it's a film that perfectly balances an iconic comic saga with the realism of the MCU. It doesn't feel absurd or goofy, it takes itself seriously. That's what makes it so intense and captivating. Also, Spidey is in it, so I'm biased.
There's no clear evil villain on either side of this. It's just a matter of who do you agree with. That's what makes it such a good conflict, you know? It's not enemy versus hero, it's friends, it's family.
The Russo brothers had massive success in their previous Marvel film The Winter Soldier, but Civil War proved they have the ability to combine multiple character arcs and still create a satisfying story. From this, the Russo brothers would go on to direct 2 of the most anticipated crossover events in cinema, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. They seem to just understand these characters and the universe incredibly well. They use their knowledge of Marvel's comic history to their advantage, and the tone they set these films in is exactly what the MCU should be. Writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely returned to yet another Captain America film, as they were the main writers of both The First Avenger and The Winter Soldier. Marvel basically hit gold combining these amazing writers and directors. These guys deserve the credit. They tie in a lot of plot points that were set up throughout Phase 1 and 2. This film also sets a standard for Phase 3. Phase 3 for me was a brilliant phase. It brought us a lot of important and memorable films. I'll dive more into that when I eventually review Phase 3 as a whole, but this film definitely defined that phase. Although the runtime is 2 hours and 28 minutes, it genuinely doesn't feel that long. It's paced perfectly and there are no moments that feel tacked on, and the parts that may stray away from the action are integral to the story. Chris Evans' journey from The First Avenger to Civil War was one that brought a lot of fans to the franchise, but so did RDJ's trilogy, and this is what made Civil War so impactful. Compared to your average Avengers movie, it created this divide between fans, but in a cool way. I remember having a really interesting conversation with a friend back at school when this came out, and we both had some interesting points on who should come out on top. So it saw people with existing relationships with these characters become heavily invested. Chris's portrayal is just as consistent as it has been throughout the franchise. He does well keeping this serious interpretation of the character, which goes well with the tone of the film. His reasoning as to why the Sokovia Accords were not ideal, fearing that the government would stop them from acting quickly to save people's lives, is something I got behind. So I was definitely Team Cap.
You chose to do that. If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose.
On the flip side, there's Tony Stark. who believes there should be a framework for the Avengers to follow, which is hilariously hypocritical of him, as he's the one who usually causes these massive calamities, such as Ultron. However, it's also due to this that he feels guilty not to sign it, you know? Downey continues his amazing portrayal as Tony here, as there's a lot of heartbreaking revelations. The scene where we find out what happened to his parents is crushing, and his reaction to it is unforgettable.
Did you know? I didn't know it was him.
This movie has a collective of brilliant actors and actresses. There are too many to go over individually, but a few stand out, mostly because of their screen time. For example, Sebastian Stan's Bucky Barnes played a major part in the story, and is the main reason why Tony and Cap are fighting in the first place. The revelation that the Winter Soldier assassinated Tony's parents was a crazy twist. It puts a nice bow on some storylines that were never properly explored. We get great utilization of Vision, as he was only introduced in Age of Ultron, so it was fascinating to see his powers in a new light, even if he almost killed Rhodey. Black Widow was another iconic piece in this movie, as her actions kind of set the way for the final act.
Said I'd help you find him, not catch him. There's a difference.
This film also introduces two of the most badass superheroes from the Marvel roster, Spider-Man and Black Panther. It's not overwhelming, they fit in nicely with the story, especially Black Panther, and they both have some incredibly memorable scenes. Spider-Man's introduction still gives me goosebumps to this day. His suit, although heavily CGI, fits within the MCU really well, and because Tony built it for him, a lot of the gimmicks and details make sense. Tom Holland's interpretation of Peter Parker is excellent, and I know there's a lot of opinions out there on who portrayed Spidey the best, but with Tom, he really hits the nail on the head.
Don't tell it me.
Chadwick Boseman's introduction as T'Challa was a substantial addition to the MCU. It really is a shame he's no longer with us. I would have loved to have seen more stories involving him. Also, Black Panther's suit is one of the best in the MCU. You know I'm not wrong. Lastly, I want to talk about Baron Zemo. His villainous arc is refreshing to see. He's not a madman looking for power, unlike a lot of the villains we've had up until now. He's more complex than that, turning the Avengers against one another and just hating superpowered people in general. His family, who had tragically died in the Sokovia attack, is the main reason he does this, and his desperation to avenge them is just saddening. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. It means a lot, genuinely. It seems as though I've gone through this movie without mentioning its flaws, which, like all movies, it definitely has some. Mostly for me, its flaws are found in its editing. And trust me, I can't edit for shit, so it's not something I should have an opinion on. But there are just some very quick cuts during the fighting scenes at the beginning of the film, and that may be good for those who have zero attention span due to TikTok, but for me, it gives me a headache. I love the realistic camera utilization in The Winter Soldier. It let me understand and appreciate the choreography a lot more, so they should have just stuck with that at the beginning of this movie. Also, the CGI is a bit lackluster in places, but it's nothing like Phase 4's effects. Considering that, it's still a strong addition to the universe and holds some of the most monumental events in the history of the MCU, and that's why I give this film such high praise. Its intensity and powerful utilization of its characters is what holds this movie above some of the rest. Seriously, each character in this film has an amazing use of their powers, and rewatching it now made me realize how awesome all these heroes are. If you're ever in a Marvel slump, just rewatch this movie, and trust me, you'll feel the love you once had for the universe come straight back. Doctor Strange brings a whole new level of lore to the MCU. For me, this film has a massive resemblance to the first Thor movie, as they both bring in the more mystical side of the original Marvel comics, and both are fairly mediocre. Regarding that, Doctor Strange dives into the deep end of the magical realm, with some amazing new effects and some fascinating new dimensions. Not to mention the cape. I love the cape.
There is the street level narratives of the Marvel Universe. There's the cosmic level, which Thor and Guardians and the Avengers have taken us to. But there is a very important supernatural side. Doctor Strange is our perfect entry point into that.
Production for a Doctor Strange movie goes all the way back to 1986, with some drafts being created but never finding a distributor. This changed in 2014 when Kevin Feige hired Scott Derrickson to direct an MCU solo film. Usually known for his horror background, he did a pretty spectacular job. The screenwriter this time around is John Spice, known for writing films like Passengers and Prometheus, with his recent screenplays being Dune Part 1 and 2. The effects in this film are wild. Feige and Derrickson wanted a Steve Ditko, Stan Lee era of visualization for the film, and in my opinion, it's the best thing about this movie. The use of the mirror dimension is a mind-boggling Inception type effect. My favourite all-round scene though is during the first time meeting the Ancient One. You really feel as though you've been shot off to another universe while watching that. You can see Derrickson's former horror background, such as the fingers that start sprouting new hands over and over. It's a bad trip.
What's in that tea? Psilocybin? LSD?
It's just tea.
With Benedict Cumberbatch, his depiction of Stephen Strange is fantastic. He fits the personality perfectly. His arrogance and desperation to be cured are what make it so good. Cumberbatch wasn't the only choice, however. Marvel was having trouble getting him to agree to the contract as he had other projects that demanded his time. So they were also looking at people like Ethan Hawke, Ewan McGregor, Matthew McConaughey, Jake Gyllenhaal, Colin Farrell, Jared Leto, and finally Joaquin Phoenix, along with some others. But seeing as Derrickson and Feige wanted Benedict Cumberbatch so badly, they completely shifted the production to fit around him, allowing Cumberbatch to join the project. Throughout the film, it's fun to see Strange's slow transformation into a more compassionate and wise sorcerer, willing to sacrifice himself multiple times to save the world.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Strange's outfit is very similar to the comics, featuring the Cloak of Levitation and the Eye of Agamotto, otherwise known as the Time Stone. He was pretty dripped out for his first movie, huh? His powers are also fascinating to see here, even if they're just a couple of spells, but I found that to be a compelling aspect of the film. He is training after all, and the fact he only knows a few tricks puts him in a dangerous position. We get a unique take on the Ancient One from the comics, portrayed by Tilda Swinton. I have zero problems with this. I think her presence is what makes this film feel so original. The tough love technique she uses on Strange is fantastic. It bodes well with his own arrogance and gets through to him. She ultimately dies by Caecilius, although she seems pretty chill about it. I think it's because she has found her successor in Strange. Also, her death created a heartfelt way to implement the astral plane, as time goes slowly there, giving her a moment to say goodbye to Strange. Talking of Caecilius, Mads Mikkelsen depicts him in an intimidating way, but Mads could have portrayed a much more interesting character in the MCU, and I still stand by that. With Caecilius, he feels like a bog-standard villain and seems to have just been a vessel for Dormammu's dark magic, intending to merge the dark dimension with Earth. Once Strange makes a bargain with Dormammu, Caecilius is horrifically sent to the dark dimension. As they ascend upwards, you can see a purple light emitting from their head, making people believe they became the mindless ones from the comics. Some supporting characters such as Rachel McAdams' Christine Palmer, Chiwetel Ejiofor's Baron Mordo, and Benedict Wong's portrayal as Wong were a crucial part of the plot. Although I do feel as though both Christine and Mordo were the most stale aspects of the film, not having as much exposition as the rest of the cast. Wong, however, was a delight as he brought a lot, if not all, of the laughs.
Do you ever laugh?
No.
So this film has a lot of connections to the wider Marvel universe that make this feel like a genuine addition to the MCU, such as the Eye of Agamotto, which, like I've covered, is the Time Stone. We previously had a passing mention of Strange back in The Winter Soldier, as Hydra had used Armin Zola's database to see who could be an upcoming threat.
Bruce Banner, Stephen Strange, anyone who's a threat to Hydra.
This film also sets a decent groundwork for the multiverse, as different dimensions and realities are introduced, guiding the way for Phase 4. An Easter egg that I find the most fascinating that links to the multiverse is when Baron Mordo talks of a relic called the Staff of the Living Tribunal.
This is the staff of the Living Tribunal.
The Living Tribunal is a three-headed cosmic entity that oversees all realities. It has also made an appearance throughout Phase 4, like in Loki, Thor Love and Thunder, and coincidentally Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. I love this one because of how subtle yet important it is to the grand scale of the MCU. The post-credits of the movie showed us Thor talking to Strange in the Sanctum. I remember that being a really exciting teaser, but the fact it's ripped straight from Ragnarok makes it feel lazy. The last credit scene features Baron Mordo declaring that there are too many sorcerers as he steals the magic from an unwilling guy. This seems to be leading to the same arc that Mordo has in the comics, although we still haven't had any payoff to this scene. Hopefully we get something in Doctor Strange 3. Lastly, Stan Lee gets his usual cameo appearance, this time reading a book on the bus. The book is actually a 1954 essay on psychedelics called The Doors of Perception, which fits nicely in with the trippy effects we see throughout the film. I won't lie to you, this film wasn't my favourite through Phase 3, and I can't put my finger on why. It could be due to the ordinary villain, but at the same time I loved the inclusion and handling of Dormammu. It could be Stephen Strange, as he's not the most lovable guy since he's so stubborn, but then again he does commend himself by the end. It's a tricky one, and I think it's a really strong origin story. Rewatching it for the review, I've come to notice there isn't as much humour as there is in, say, Ant-Man, but it makes sense. The protagonist is a stoic guy, and not every movie needs humour, but that may be the main reason people don't return to this film. All in all, the movie has some incredible highlights. The ending with Dormammu is what took this film to another level, and it was smart to use the Time Stone to manipulate the villain instead of there just being a big brawl like every other Marvel movie. Talking of the Time Stone, its utilization here is insane. The scene where he uses it in Hong Kong has some of the most satisfying effects I've seen. It reminds me of the Harry Potter spell that fixes everything, you know? Reparo, it's Reparo. So considering its flaws, it's a magical addition to the MCU. Yes, it could have been better in places, but it really is just opening a door to a whole new realm of possibilities. And what they gave us is a perfect balance of the MCU we've come to love and the wackiness of wizardry. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 sends us back into the cosmos for some more fun shenanigans, and it feels refreshing, especially as the last two Phase 3 releases were quite intense. Although there are moments in this film that are just as emotional.
What?
We get Baby Groot though. I reviewed a bunch of projects by James Gunn, and I don't want to sound biased, but he knows what he's doing. Guardians 2 proves that over and over again, with some wild revelations and decent humor.
The first movie was about becoming a family. This movie is about being a family.
I'm your dad, Peter.
So, as you already know, this film was directed by James Gunn. He also wrote the film, and I think he did a great job. Not only in crafting an awesome story, but creating such a strong structure that isn't just a copy and paste of the previous film. It was produced with a $200 million budget, and yes, that is a huge amount of money. It's actually less than the first Guardians film, as the budget for that was around $232 million. The film's visual effects look fantastic. Scenes such as the fighting between Quill and Ego are memorable because of the CGI. Not to mention Rocket and Baby Groot look incredibly well detailed. Also, we get some spectacular new worlds and visuals in general that made this movie pop. Well, there's a ton of characters in this movie, and it's another reason to how well thought out the narrative is that it can handle this many, but I'll get into that in the next section. Quill is the core of this story, and it revolves around him finding his long-lost father, Ego, which is a massive development for his character. I also love the inclusion of Ego as it opens up so many new avenues and expands the lore of the MCU. Kurt Russell, who plays Ego the Living Planet, is the best choice for this role. He's charismatic, but at the same time can come across as quite the narcissist, hence the name. Let's talk about Ego's real motivations. He's a celestial being from the dawn of the universe, and from his monologue we find that he was able to control atoms around him, creating this planet himself. After this, he sought out other planets and organisms, but he concluded that they were disappointing, leading to his ultimate goal of expanding himself over thousands of planets. The revelation that Ego gave Quill's mum a tumor was mental, and Peter's reaction to that gives me goosebumps every time.
That sounds bad.
When it comes to Gamora, we get a massive development with her and her sister Nebula, as by the end of the film, they actually come to an understanding, which is something I never thought would have happened because they're both so stubborn. Their fight on Ego's planet was very fun to watch, as both are trained assassins, meaning for a massive confrontation. Gamora in this movie seems to become a lot more connected to the team, and especially Quill, ramping up their relationship. We don't get too much of Rocket, but Guardians 3 does make up for that. His connection to Groot is obvious to see here, and especially as Groot is now a baby, Rocket's handling of him is brilliant. It's what gives us a lot of the good humor.
No, that's exactly what you just said. How is that even possible?
Talking of Groot, this is him at his funniest and cutest, as he understands practically nothing but can get things done, only when he wants to.
Tell me you guys have a refrigerator somewhere with a bunch of severed human toes.
Rocket does get some interesting action scenes, such as the forest fight between him and the Ravagers, which felt like a tribute to Home Alone as he uses all these resourceful traps. It goes to show his ingenuity and just how smart he really is. Rocket and Yondu's connection is something that doesn't get spoken about as much. Yondu uses some tough love on him, telling Rocket he knows exactly what he's going through, in terms of his true feelings for people and himself, with Yondu eventually telling Rocket that they are the same. In the end, building Rocket's character to a much more understanding and empathetic level. Drax is back with his witty and dumb humor, although this movie actually uses this to its advantage with the introduction of Mantis. Mantis being an insectoid species who is later found out to be a daughter of Ego and brother to Quill. Although she doesn't inherit Ego's powers, instead gaining the ability to alter people's emotions and putting people into a deep sleep, which is the main reason Ego never killed her like the rest of his children, as she was able to ease his mind during these long searches for his other children. Anyway, back to Drax's connection to Mantis, as her naivety perfectly balances with his literalist personality. It makes for some incredibly funny moments between them, and I love their relationship. I'm glad we got more of it in the Christmas special. Lastly, there's Yondu. His place in this film is heartfelt, as he finds himself helping the other Guardians in taking down Ego after the Ravagers had formed a mutiny against him with Taserface, leaving him, Rocket and Groot to take out each clan member. His powers were wonderfully executed through this scene in particular. Not only that, but the music hits hard with Come a Little Bit Closer by Jay and the Americans. His sacrifice to save Peter was an emotional ending to his character arc. However, it also brought the Guardians closer in a way. And his death not only resonates with Peter and Rocket, but with the Ravagers, who came to say their final goodbyes as he was a lifelong member. Throughout the film, there are a few subtle nods to the wider Marvel universe, but not as many as I would have liked. I get that it's set in outer space, so it's hard to tie it into other Marvel projects. However, saying that, the few connections we do get are really interesting. For one, there's Ego, who is an ancient celestial being, which set the foundation for other celestial beings we meet, say in the Eternals. When Ego shows Peter what eternity looks like, we can actually see a glimpse of the character Eternity in Quill's eyes. Eternity later shows up in Thor: Love and Thunder. We get a cameo of the great Stan Lee, and honestly, it's my favourite of all of his cameos, as we see him talking to a group of Watchers. The Watchers from the comics are a species that pretty much monitor the multiverse, and if you've seen What If, then you know how well this ties into that. This also proves that Stan Lee in the MCU is an informant for the Watchers. I can still remember what an insane revelation that was. Lastly, there's a post-credits scene that references Adam Warlock. We see his cocoon just like in his first comic appearance in Fantastic Four issue 66, and this scene was something that got us all hyped. Now, this film does have its flaws, and on a rewatch I can definitely see a few. In terms of structure, this movie leans too much into subplots, such as the Ravagers, the Sovereign, and Nebula's hunt for Gamora, not leaving enough room for the main story to feel as big as it was. Just one more thing to note is the humour. A lot of people were not a fan of the humour in Volume 2, and I can see where they're coming from in some aspects, as it cuts through the seriousness in certain scenes. Other than that, this film is filled with wonderful moments that are well remembered in the Marvel community. I think the use of Ego was a smart idea, as his presence not only brings so much emotion, but it also expands on Quill's character and background, something that was teased back in Guardians 1.
Your mother was of Earth. Your father, well, He's something very ancient.
That could be why you were able to hold a stone for as long as you did.
I was excited to return to this film for the review, mostly for the action and humor, and the fact it has never left a bad taste in my mouth is an indication that this is a seriously cool movie. Well, where do I begin? Spider-Man Homecoming was a surprising and essential film to join the MCU. The reasons are simple. For one, it's Spidey, and two, he's an integral part of the universe. His addition to Civil War was crazy. After I had seen his portrayal in that, I was excited to see his next appearance, and this film delivers. Marvel and Sony, they do get the credit too, knew how to implement the character into the 21st century, and they utilize it in interesting ways.
Spider-Man is the biggest Marvel character. He is the jewel in the crown. Such an amazing icon. He is a very different type of hero because he is, quite simply, the greatest superhero of all time.
So, as you know, Marvel and Sony's relationship has been rocky over the years, but in 2014, Amy Pascal, co-chairman of Sony Pictures, started to discuss plans for Marvel to produce a new trilogy of Spider-Man films, with Sony retaining creative control and distribution. I'm not going to go into full details because we'd be here forever, but in early 2015, Kevin Feige announced that Spidey was coming to the MCU, and Tom Holland was then cast in June of 2015. John Watts, who previous to this only had a small portfolio of movies, was the director of the film. It's surprising to me that they chose such a newcomer to handle a movie this big, but in the end he did an amazing job. Same goes for his work on the entire trilogy. The film's budget was around $175 million. The worldwide gross was estimated to be $880 million. Talk about profit. Let's move on to the visuals. The action pieces here look incredibly well crafted. My favourite has to be the ferry scene. It looks astonishing. Maybe a bit too much CG, but it's one of the movie's most memorable moments. The suit, although the same as what we saw in Civil War, works here. It's flashy for a Spidey suit, I know, but like I said in my Civil War review, Tony is his mentor. He built all of these gadgets for Peter, so it makes sense. I love the detailing of the suit. You can see each individual stitching, and although it looks like it's just been plastered onto Peter, it somehow feels real. Not to mention the Vulture's costume, it is really well put together, and it takes the absurdity of the comics and gives it a cool, realistic adaptation. The tie-in to the Avengers and the Chitauri was a smart idea, creating a way to bring in the technology used by Toomes to create his flying device. I still think Tom Holland was a perfect pick for Peter Parker. He comes across as a genuine and earnest guy. His skills in gymnastics is what solidified his role, and you can see his passion in becoming Peter Parker. This version of Peter is a spot-on interpretation of the classic 60s character. He's just as nerdy and sincere. Tom wasn't the first pick, however, as he was upon a lineup of various other actors. The final shortlist included actors like Asa Butterfield, Charlie Rowe, Charlie Plummer, Matt Lintz, and Judah Lewis. I'm glad Holland got the part. I think his take on the webhead is just what Marvel needed, and his portrayal appears to be getting better with age. The villain of the movie is Adrian Toomes, otherwise known as the Vulture. Once I heard the Vulture was going to be the main villain of Homecoming, I was excited. I've always thought that a cinematic fight between Spidey and the Vulture would be an awesome watch, and I wasn't wrong. However, saying that, I would have loved a battle between them flying past the New York high-rises. Just a thought. Toomes' depiction here is somewhat similar to the comics. He's a cold and cunning character that finds joy in robbery.
Business is good.
Although you do get to see his point of view within the film, finding out that Tony's Department of Damage Control bankrupts his company, creating resentment for the wealthy. The twist that he's Liz Allen's dad was crazy. It brings the safety of Peter's school life and the danger of Spider-Man's life together, and it completely throws Peter off. I love it. So Tony Stark makes his appearance in the film, and although it makes sense to have him here, a lot of the Marvel community are quite divided by his presence. It's probably not a shocker, but I enjoy it. I'll get into it more in my flaws section of the video, but RDJ is a key role in the story, and bringing his influential character into the film gives Peter the dedication to be a better hero.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it.
Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei, is a unique take on her comic book counterpart, and I think it plays well into the story. However, I liked the fact that Aunt May was old and vulnerable. It made Peter's responsibility to look after her all the more meaningful. I'm going to speed past these two, but MJ and Ned are wonderful additions to the film. I felt the friendship there through the screen. The rest of the school ensemble are really nice renditions of their comic book selves, and yes, even if they don't look exactly alike, they still hold the same values, which is what counts. Now for my favourite part of the video, the connections segment. There's a ton of Easter eggs and nods to the wider universe within this film, the biggest being Tony Stark, as he ties Spidey into the MCU perfectly. Other integral characters are Pepper Potts, who makes her return near the end, and more importantly Happy Hogan, who is reluctantly a liaison between Tony and Peter. Apart from the more obvious references, the most interesting are actually linked to Spider-Man's comic background. We see many takes of his most iconic villains such as the Shocker, the Scorpion, the Vulture, and the Tinkerer. All of these were fun to see. However, the one I found the most intriguing was the Prowler, otherwise known as Aaron Davis, the uncle to Miles Morales.
I don't want those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here.
We're still waiting on Miles' introduction to the MCU, and although Tom Holland is still carrying the torch, I think it'll be soon. But this reference confirms that he exists in the universe, and that's very important. We get the first appearance of the Department of Damage Control, who later have a more pivotal role in No Way Home and Wonder Man. Stan Lee's cameo is as entertaining as always.
Don't make me come down there, you punk!
And as for the post-credits scene, we get what seems to be a teaser paving the way for the Sinister Six. Now, I don't know about you, but I would love to see a Sinister Six movie featuring Tom Holland and his past rivalries. Implementing that into the MCU would be fantastic. Now, there's a few flaws I find in rewatching this film. Some say its dependency on Iron Man impacts what should be a standalone movie, but I somewhat disagree. We do get Iron Man here, and while his presence does feel like it reduces Spider-Man's self-reliance, Tony mostly pushes him to the sidelines, with Peter then becoming more independent throughout the film. The usage of Peter's powers was definitely something I wish was prioritized more. Especially his Spidey sense. We really didn't delve into that as much here. I know it's been done before countless times, but it's iconic, and I would have loved to have seen a scene similar to the way Sam Raimi handled his powers. What we don't get, which I was really sad about, was the vastness of New York City. Sam Raimi made New York feel enormous by the simple use of swinging, and man, we get none of it. Not really. Not as good or as practical as it is in Sam Raimi's films. And that was a massive letdown. If we just got a few scenes of him swinging by the city's high-rises with style, then this movie would have been a 10 out of 10. I'd like to know your thoughts on this film. It seems to be fairly divisive in some communities online, and I don't understand the hate myself, as it does get a whole lot right. I think the way they treat his return to the big screen is wise. They don't give us a retelling of the same origin story or a retread of the same characters. They give us something new to chew on, and that's the main reason this version feels so unique. I believe that the Thor Ragnarok was Marvel's plan from the beginning, bringing together the most unique and surprising duo to create a strange but satisfying story that develops both characters and impacts the MCU in a surreal way, and boy did they pull it off. Not only creating a pairing that is still remembered years after its release, but setting a very colourful and outrageous style for the main protagonist that Marvel has been struggling with since his debut in 2011.
Tonally, I think it's just a perfect mix for where the character and story needed to go. You know, different costumes, different weapons, different cast or characters to work off give you a different energy.
The development of the film is interesting. It introduces a brand new director to the franchise, Taika Waititi, who I think was a decent yet wild approach, especially regarding the type of film this is. Ragnarok literally means the ending of all things, and dropping a director typically known for his comedic-based films into it was just surprising to me. Marvel were really at a high point during Phase 3. Their previous film Spider-Man Homecoming managed to gross over $880 million. Similarly, Thor Ragnarok grossed $854 million with a $170 million budget. So they were absolutely rolling in it. Considering that budget, the visuals are gorgeous. It's what really drew me to this film, and it's what Thor movies should be like. Colourful and exciting. It genuinely feels like it drops us into the mythology that Thor is based upon and brings it to life. CGI models like Surtur, Hulk, Korg and Fenrir are really well detailed, and this is the best we've seen Hulk in action. The fight between him and Surtur was a spectacle. It felt like it was ripped straight from a comic book. Not to mention Thor's powers being spectacular and utilized in ways we've never seen before. His scene on the Rainbow Bridge, accompanied by Led Zeppelin, is a moment I'll never forget. I've already hinted at this, but the way this film interprets Thor is something special. It really gets who MCU's Thor should be. He comes across as stupidly humorous here, and I like to think he puts this on as a sort of defense mechanism due to the amount of grief he's been through. If you look more deeply into his depiction here, he's becoming a lot more vulnerable and selfless, which is a massive change from his first appearance. It develops his character in an amazing way, and I praise this movie for that.
I'm not as strong as you.
No. You're stronger.
The Hulk/Bruce Banner is an integral part of the story. It's a bit convenient that he's suddenly back in the presence of Thor, but who cares, I guess. His involvement is seriously cool, and the way they've somehow developed a character like him is really interesting. Now having the ability to talk in full sentences.
Big monster!
Although he's super vocal now, he does act like a toddler, and that's where it got a lot of laughs from me. Hulk is supposed to have the mental age of a 5-year-old at this point, so it makes sense, and his interaction with Thor just makes it even more hilarious. Loki turns up again, capping off the twist that he was ruling Asgard at the end of Thor: The Dark World. His role in this film does serve him justice though. He becomes more of an ally to Thor here as they take on their sister. He's viewed as more playful and timid compared to his last appearance, and while that does help develop his character, it does feel as though he was nerfed and left to the sidelines.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
Talking of their sister, Hela makes her debut portrayed by Cate Blanchett, and I really found this character intimidating. Maybe the humor dialed it down a bit, but she was still just as scary and dominating.
What were you the god of again?
She pretty much steamrolls Thor, destroying his hammer and slicing his eye. Some backstory on Hela is that she's the goddess of death and the firstborn of Odin. Her and Odin were powerful allies in the past, but after she helped Odin to take the 9 realms, he realized her desire for violence was too much, even exceeding his own, later banishing her to Hell, a pocket dimension in which she was freed once Odin died. The way her thorn crown and daggers seem to materialize is animated in an interesting way. She's incredibly strong, crushing Thor's hammer, and she's agile. She also seems to have the power of unlimited daggers. I found that quite fun to watch as she just tears through Asgard's army. Of course, we're going to talk about him. The Grandmaster, played by Jeff Goldblum, is a quirky addition to the movie and holds quite the intimidating personality. The Grandmaster in the comics is a manipulative and powerful elder of the universe. He can be quite childish and competitive, and we do see that portrayed here as he cheats during one of the contests. At the same time, he comes across as a very flamboyant and funny character. I love Goldblum anyway, but this is him at his best, honestly. Lastly, I'm just going to have to fly past these guys, but Korg and Valkyrie were some interesting additions to the film. Especially Korg. Everything he does is just hilarious.
Piss off, ghost!
Valkyrie here is a stoic and ruthless warrior with a dark background, and although she may seem like a boring character at first, her addition to the group is what the film needed. This movie is full of wonderful connections to the wider universe. Things like the play on Thor: The Dark World and Doctor Strange's cameo are incredible ways of placing this movie into the timeline of the MCU. There's some super deep connections within this film that I found way more fascinating though, such as Surtur, who in the comics is a powerful fire demon who rules Muspelheim, which is a realm we actually saw in the previous movie. I loved his inclusion though, it felt like we were really diving into the mythology surrounding Thor. Another Easter egg is found carved into the Grandmaster's palace. This massive sculpture includes previous champions of the contest, and from what we can see, it seems Man-Thing was a champion at one point. We can also see Beta Ray Bill, whose character in the comics is a powerful horse-headed alien worthy of lifting Thor's hammer, and who also sports his own weapon Stormbreaker, which is introduced in Avengers: Infinity War. The Tesseract makes another appearance as we see Loki glance at it once he's in Odin's vault, later revealing that he did in fact steal it, and this set up the prologue for Infinity War perfectly. Lastly, Stan Lee makes one hell of an appearance as Thor's hairdresser.
Now don't you move. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be.
Now, this film does have its flaws, and coming back to it years later, it definitely feels as though it was favouring humour over its serious or important moments. And I've talked about this in my review for Guardians Volume 2. It seems as though this was in an era of Marvel where they were really pandering to a younger audience, or they believed that Marvel fans were only in it for the humour, and while the humour is what makes these movies memorable, it definitely doesn't need to cut into the highly emotional scenes, and we get that a lot in this movie. Don't get me wrong, I love the humour here, I think it's one of the movie's best attributes. However, the destruction of Asgard would have felt so much more compelling and meaningful if there were no jokes to undercut it. There's many examples across this film, like Bruce sacrificing his human form for Asgard, willing to possibly become Hulk for forever, and it's ruined with a faceplant for a quick laugh. But I think that Asgard's destruction is the worst Marvel bathos I've come across. So with that being said, this film does eat up a lot of potentially tragic moments, and that does annoy me, but there are times where the humour was brilliantly executed and perfectly placed. I think this movie walks on a tightrope when it comes to the Marvel fanbase. People want to discredit it because of its hugely impacting flaws, however, it brings a lot of nuance to a character so mistreated in the past, and it does what Marvel fans have been craving for since the beginning of this franchise, which is placing two lovable characters together and seeing what they can do. This film feels like a comic book, not only in its tone, but the way some would interconnect in fascinating ways. I have a lot of love for Phase 1 of the MCU, and I realise for most people it's the most beloved phase, as it establishes this universe and its characters. But there's something special about Phase 3 that really solidified my obsession with the MCU. This phase introduces major characters from the Marvel roster like Spider-Man, Doctor Strange and Black Panther, and I have to say their introduction to the MCU felt surreal. Yes, Civil War was jam-packed with both Spider-Man and Black Panther, but they do it in an elegant way that doesn't ruin the mystery of both characters and their origins, leaving room for their own solo adventures. This phase also began combining two or more Marvel characters into a solo story. For instance, Thor Ragnarok. Putting Hulk and Thor together was not only a money-making scheme, but a pinnacle point to the MCU, as Marvel could experiment with these now fleshed out characters. Let's talk about the visuals of Phase 3. I mentioned in, I think it was my Ant-Man video, about how that movie set the standard for Marvel's visualization. And I realize now that Civil War was at the forefront of that. Yes, Ant-Man had a very peculiar style, but Civil War is when Marvel implemented that vibrant and colourful saturation that Marvel is renowned for, and we see that utilised in every other Phase 3 movie. Seriously, the cinematography in each of these movies is spectacular, and it's just another reason to why Phase 3 is a wonderful achievement. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this phase. If you've got anything to add, just pop it in the comments. I'll be covering the Amazing Spider-Man films next. Then I'll be straight back to each movie from part 2 of Phase 3, so keep an eye out.